A few months back, my brother Ian showed me an amusing Tumblr post. A link is in the description if you want to read the whole thing, but long story short, this post lays out a format called Ulipo Dragon Scotsman. In ODS, participants play with a 99-card singleton deck that is led by a Commissar, a legendary creature which can be cast at any time. Okay, it's EDH, but without any E's in the names of cards. Naturally, I had to do something with this information, which brings us to today. Last week, I instructed the people of my Discord server to submit a deck with no E's, and to also include an approximately 100-word written work to accompany it, also without E's. Was that part because getting almost 400 submissions on my last deck building challenge just about killed me? A snail never tells. However, among the much more manageable 180 submissions that these somewhat irritating requirements produced were some really delightful submissions, and in this video I want to tell you about some of them and how they managed the daunting task of excluding the most common character in the English alphabet. I'll also be including a number of honorable mentions on my website, since there were some really great submissions, both in terms of deck building and writing quality. A major struggle for people with this challenge was finding decks and archetypes that aren't too hindered by a lack of ease. Not being able to build decks with ease eliminates roughly 83% of all Magic cards, so if you have 6 cards that do a particular thing, on average all but one of them will be eliminated. However, some types of cards had shockingly few of their options eliminated. For one, polymorph cards. Only around half of all polymorph cards were eliminated, leaving a respectable 5 left for any red-blue decks to enjoy, which was taken advantage of by a neat Yasova deck that was submitted. Another survivor was the card Rat Colony, which allowed people to easily fill out a large portion of their deck, and this was utilized by a particular Gerard deck. A third deck that was relatively unhindered was Ratadrabic Nazgul combo, a deck style submitted by several people. The one I'm going to be highlighting here is a delightfully 2000s deck. Nell's Arcum Dagsson Station Deck. Let's start with the poem. 4 stations in total, any will do. Possibility without limit, actions until all is ruin. You must grind to summon, and salvaging must follow blasting. Wanting won't stop sorrow, for annihilation will find a way. Artifacts for good? What a laugh. You know what is coming. All you do to fight will only bring it to pass. Only a tool, your thoughts void against my monarchy. Not a man, only a commissar, only my way, only war. Arcum Dagsson is a spicy commander from Cold Snap, and he's one that has the potential to be quite powerful in modern-day unrestricted EDH. 4 mana for a creature that can sacrifice an artifact creature to find a non-creature artifact every turn is quite potent, and the non-creature artifacts we have available to search for in the year of our Lord 2025 are quite horrifying compared to what existed back when Arcum Dagsson was printed in 2006. However, what do the top-tier tutoring targets like Darksteelforge, Portal to Phyrexia, and Godpharaoh statue all have in common? Ease, of course. So naturally, any Arcum Dagsson enjoyers had to get a bit more creative, which brings me to the tutoring targets of choice for this deck, Stations. There were 4 cards printed in 5th Dawn with Station in the name, and it just so happens that none of them have Ease. 2 of them you may know as classic combo pieces, Blasting Station and Grinding Station, whereas Summoning Station and Salvaging Station are somewhat less popular cards that only hipster YouTubers play. However, when the 4 of these are in play at the same time, all of their respective abilities and untap clauses merge together to form an infinite combo with each other, so long as a low-cost artifact for Salvaging Station is in the graveyard. The 2 high-cost stations are activated to create permanence, which untaps the low-cost stations, and then those 2 are activated to sacrifice the permanence and inflict harm on opponents, which untaps the high-cost stations. Rinse and repeat until opponents are dead. So the heart of this deck is these 4 artifacts and a commander who can find them. But what supports that? Well, first, artifact creatures. This is the resource that Arcum needs to create his stations, so naturally there are 19 of them. These cards span a variety of purposes, with the most common being to help the deck ramp. Some of them are a bit filler, but with a commander like Arcum Dagsson, that's not really a problem. The other key thing this deck has is protection. Arcum is a scary commander, so to keep him alive, this deck is packing 9 counterspells and 5 other pieces of protection. Filling out the rest of the deck is a handful of removal spells, as well as a variety of other artifact-related cards. There are a handful of cards that seem here specifically to synergize with certain stations, a number of 1-cost non-creature artifacts to allow Salvaging Station to come online, and there are likewise a couple cards that can let artifacts untap. Trading Post also lightly synergizes with a couple different stations, yet another possible machine that can be cobbled together. All of this has a very retro energy about it, and I enjoy that. Moving along, something else you may note about this no ease format is that it excludes a basic land, forests. This challenge did have a somewhat below average number of green containing decks in general, but there were a surprising number of people who opted to build a mono green deck. There are something like 11 lands without ease that both produce green and are legal in a mono green commander deck, and pairing those with a modest number of green producing mana rocks can get you up to a symbol count that's an aggressive mulligan policy away from being adequate, I suppose. Adding on an extra color makes the situation a bit better. It seems like non-basic lands tend to have fewer E's than other card types, so there are a surprising number of options within two-color decks. That brings me to a green deck that I want to highlight, Shuckle's Momir Vig Biovisionary deck. There was actually another Momir Vig Biovisionary deck, shout out to the person who made that one, but this is the one I'm opting to feature. Let's start out with the story. Lost and lacking will, Momir looks through his list of organisms. Nothing is worth his scrutiny, Momir complains. Finally, his scanning finds a grand form without fault, Biovisionary. Thinking hard, bold but rational philosophy churns logic through airtight analysis. Satisfactory strands of thought align into his magnum opus. Simic assistant's tutor, a cryptozoologist, a quandrix cultivator, an amphinologist, a bookworm. All paths find Biovisionary. Momir looks for mana, through dorks, rocks, and things part both. His supply is found. A cunning trick finds its way into his mind. Bouncing his assistance, a portal of sanctuary, a shard of crystal, and an umbilicus fulfill his fantasy. With Biovisionary on board, many cards copy it. Organisms such as Mockingbird, artifacts such as Soul Foundry, and surprising magic such as Sakashima's Will allow Momir to join in too. 4 mirrors from a primordial first. A smiling Momir claims victory. That story laid out a lot of what the deck is doing, but let's do a brief rundown. Momir Vig is a commander with 2 abilities attached. Casting green creature spells lets you tutor up creatures to the top of your library, and casting blue creature spells lets you draw the top card of your library. So, casting blue-green spells puts cards directly into your hand, in classic original Ravnica fashion. Biovisionary is a card that wins you the game if you have at least 4 copies of it in play on your end step. In a singleton format like EDH, this means that some form of copying is generally required to make it work as a win con, and naturally this deck has a fair amount of that. 12 cards exist to copy it in some form or other, though these span a wide range of things. You've got the basic copy plan, which will take a bit of effort. You've got the stronger, though non-tutorable plan of using a card like Sakashima's Will on a wide board, and you've got riskier plans such as exiling Biovisionary under Soul Foundry and hoping to be able to activate it 4 times. As for finding each of these components, the deck features 9 Simic creatures for purposes of tutoring up clones, as well as a number of other green creatures. There are also cards like Crystal Shard and Umbilicus, which bounce creatures to be recast, and which can also let the deck repeat ETBs on top of that. Outside of that, this deck features a good amount of ramp, which seems like a good idea for a couple reasons. For one, Momir Vig is a 5 mana commander with a concerning effect, so that's basically a 7 or 9 mana commander if you think about it. Outside of commander tax, Momir Vig also feeds the deck card advantage at a healthy clip, so naturally it makes sense to make sure to have a way of spending that. In terms of green symbols, this deck contains 15 amongst its lands and 2 amongst its colorless ramp, for a total of 17 symbols, which certainly isn't great, but can be made workable enough with a somewhat aggressive mulligan policy. This deck certainly represents a fun navigation of this challenge's tricky requirement. A number of people went for more conceptual decks. No ease is a very specific format requirement, and asking for some sort of writing submission likewise put people into a creative zone. One cool choice was a Kirk deck, with the deck builder pointing out that Kirk was canonically originally named Carrick, and his choice to remove the E from his name meshes nicely with the nature of this challenge. Another fun choice was an Azmoran Martika Dice and Occult deck that features an Underworld cookbook in a Rule Zeroed sideboard, and a Wish in the main board, with the idea being that Azmoran Martika Dice and Occult lost her cookbook and is wishing for its return. There were also not 1, not 2, but 3 X decks submitted. That's the unstable card that puts itself into your opponent's hand. The deck I'll be highlighting is an Iron Man deck that also chooses to engage in just a bit of Silver Border action. Let's start with the story. It's missing. How? Tony hasn't got an inkling. With a total of 62 4K cams running constantly throughout this wing, saving and backing up 2 TB worth of visual data to his main SSD array hourly, no burglar of any amount of skill could slip through such vanishingly slim cracks. Still, Jarvis had scrupulously dug through it all at his insisting, only to turn up nothing. And what was Tony anticipating to find, anyway? It's not a physical thing that's missing. No, this was a villain's doing, not your bog-standard cat burglar. But who? Doom? No motivation. Loki? Now that would fit, but it's difficult to sort out his thoughts without such a vital symbol. And Tony Stark's a man of action anyway. Sitting around ruminating isn't his strong suit. As his armor's hydraulics hiss into motion, Iron Man sighs and shrugs. Just gotta go out and find it, huh? Iron Man himself is a 5-mana flying beater who creates treasures and offers a birthing pod sort of effect for artifacts each turn. Should I refer to that sort of effect as an Oswald effect? A repurposing effect? Anyway, turns artifacts into other artifacts. The silver border card this deck features is Now I Know My ABCs, a card that wins you the game on your upkeep if you control permanents with all 26 letters of the alphabet in their names. Iron Man is actually a great choice to go with this for a couple reasons. For one, treasures. That's an E. Secondly, it allows the deck to go hunting for some of the less common letters out there that might be attached to artifacts. Naturally, this deck has a number of artifacts with less common characters. Tamiyo's Journal, Blazing Torch, Joyra's Familiar, Acquisition Octopus, and so on. There's even Spy Kit, an equipment that gives a creature the names of all legendary creatures, which certainly simplifies the game plan a bit as long as you can keep the creature in play until your upkeep. Even outside the artifacts, there's a lot of variety. We've got a Cumulox here for that lovely French vanilla Mirrodin gameplay, as well as Grazilax and Zorn. The core of this deck is Now I Know My ABCs, but this deck has a good number of options to pivot into a more conventional artifact beatdown sort of plan if needed. Sharding Sphinx and a handful of other flyers make for a solid plan alongside combat damage to player effects. All of this and more is explained in the deck's 700-word primer, also including no E's. I have to respect the effort on display here. I briefly toyed with the idea of writing this script E-less, but quickly abandoned that idea when it became clear how difficult long-form writing without E's is, particularly when it comes to navigating around common words I might normally use, like commander or deck. So far I've chosen to feature decks that have a neat premise, or which flaunt restrictions in some sort of creative way. However, the final deck I'm going to show off in this video is one with a decidedly more focused goal, Mirrorwing's Tiamat deck. I'll let the description explain the basics. This is a cutthroat ODS list, born for playing at maximal optimization within its format's bounds. Fixing for mana of all colors was rough, but Food Chain and a full armory of supporting cards at my disposal was too good to pass up. With a fairly low amount of stack disruption, this list wants to pull off its combo as quickly as it can. You know, it's occurring to me that all 4 decks I'm showcasing feature a commander that tutors for tools that help with some sort of unusual combo. You should definitely blame 3-3 for that. He helped me in selecting the top decks here. Anyway, let's talk about the commander. Tiamat is a 5-color dragon that costs 7 mana and tutors for 5 dragons when he enters. You might think that this means that the deck is a dragon deck, and it does have 2 dragons, but that's where it decides to call it good. This is because in the context of the deck, Tiamat's role is simple. He's just the way the deck turns infinite mana into a win. I say infinite mana because this is a Food Chain combo deck. Food Chain is a card that allows a player to exile a creature to add its mana value +1 in mana that can only be spent on creatures. This combos with Mist Hollow-Griffin, a 4-mana creature that can be cast from exile, creating infinite mana that can be spent on creature spells. Once infinite mana is obtained, Tiamat is then cast, searching for Dragonlord Dromoka and Hoarding Broodlord. Dromoka is here for protection for the rest of the combo, shutting off opposing spells and thereby protecting the 2 critical creatures that will follow from creature removal. Hoarding Broodlord is a dragon that gives all a player's spells cast from exile convoke, and on ETB tutors up a card to exile that can be cast. That card is most likely to be Joyful Storm Sculptor, a card that deals 1 damage to each opponent whenever a convoke spell is cast. Once each of these is on the field, the deck then goes back to loop Mist Hollow-Griffin with Food Chain a bunch more times, since the Griffin now has Convoke when being cast from exile and thus deals 1 damage to each opponent per cast, eventually burning them down. Because Food Chain exiles as the cost on the ability, and because the deck plays Dromoka before the other critical creatures, almost all creature removal actually can't interact with this combo, which is pretty wild. The two things that can interact with it are enchantment removal to destroy food chain and counterspells to nail key spells, and the deck naturally runs 8 counterspells to deal with that. It also runs 9 cards to slow down opposing game plans, which makes sense to buy just a little bit of time for the deck to set up. Outside of this, the rest of the deck's cards focus on pushing it to the point at which it can combo off. We've got effectively 35 lands, 14 sources of mana acceleration, 11 tutors, and 13 draw spells to let the deck find and play Mist Hollow-Griffin and Food Chain. A secondary benefit of Tiamat is that the deck has ample options for what to use for these. While losing Ease restricts the card pool a lot, having 5 colors allows basically all of these to still be respectable choices. It also allows the deck to have less trouble with the mana base than it might otherwise. A full 8 original dual lands don't contain E, and though there are only 2 untapped fetches available, another 4 tapped fetches make this a bit less problematic. Overall, this is a very fun deck to showcase the limits of the no E format. So those were the decks I wanted to highlight, but I'll briefly mention a handful more that will be in the honorable mentions. Pillow Lake submitted a sort of build-your-own slicer deck. It's a Godo deck that wants to find a salt suit, and they included a very flavorful story to go with it. Elusive Panda submitted a Gaunty Canny Acquisitor theft deck that includes no green symbols whatsoever, and which needs to use one of its other theft cards to steal a source of green mana from an opponent in order to cast Gaunty. Finally, Salmon submitted a high-powered Glarb Doomsday deck that's pretty cool. There were actually several Doomsday decks submitted. You can check out all those decks at the link to my website down in the description. Hopefully you enjoyed seeing these decks, and if you hated every minute of it, you can move along with your day in peace, knowing that this is probably the last one of these I'll be doing for at least a few months. With that said, thanks for watching, and thanks to Architect for supporting the channel. One of my favorite things about the site is the front and center Scryfall style search box that can allow quick and effortless filtering of cards by oracle text, color, or mana value. A link to all my decks is in the description if you want to check them out and see how many times the word attack or search shows up in them. I'd also like to thank my patrons, some of whom are on screen now. It's always great to know that I can make what I want and am somewhat shielded from the whims of the algorithm by the kind people who directly support me. If you want to support the channel, a link to my Patreon is in the description.